Welcome back to the Mark Prater podcast, where we aim to connect our global family of churches with our executive director. Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing great, Ben.
So we got some news last week. You sent an email out to the pastors of Sovereign Grace, letting us know that Eric Terbetsky is now our director of church planning on the leadership team, correct?
He is. I'm excited about that.
Me too. Love Eric. And so I was wondering, and I'm sure some would like to know, how was Eric selected for this role? What was the process like to make him the director of church planning?
Yeah, the process really involves a cooperation between the leadership team and the executive committee. According to our book of church order, most guys know that the executive committee has the authority to approve a guy for the leadership team and director of church planning role in particular in this case. So I just worked with them. I came up with some names of guys that I wanted to interview. I worked with the leadership team on the names, and we kind of narrowed it down to two guys. I flew to both those guys and interviewed them personally. I spent time with them and their wife and spent time with them and their team, because I wouldn't want any decision, ultimately, if either of those guys were chosen, I wouldn't want a decision to be made apart from the local elders. So that's why I walked through that process. So once I had done both those things, I'd interviewed the candidates, so to speak, then I take my recommendation to the executive committee and we talk through it together. And then they vote, and I have to report, it was a unanimous vote by the executive committee to approve Eric.
Excellent. So what kinds of questions are you asking in that interview? What are the qualifications for the role that you're considering as you work through that process?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, for director of church planning, ideally a guy who's planted a church just because he's had experience would be a qualification. I don't think that a guy would necessarily have to, but I think it just helps him in this role to understand the challenges of church planting in particular. I'm asking questions about their vision for Sovereign Grace as it relates to church planting. I'm asking them how they would recruit church planters. I'm asking them what would they change about the culture of Sovereign Grace to help us plant more churches. Those are just some of the questions I had on my list.
So the director of church planning, is he the one that's in charge of deciding whether or not a church is going to be planted or not?
Yeah, absolutely not. He doesn't have that kind of authority.
That's right.
That is the decision, as you know, and most of the guys know, of the regions. It's really the regional assembly of elders that makes the final decision after the regional church planning committee has done that work. So the director of church planning role is more to serve and support regions to help them to plant churches.
Yeah. So Eric has wonderful grace on his life as a leader and a pastor. What do you hope for as you consider, just personally, as you consider Eric as he steps into this new role and what's going to happen in the days ahead in Sovereign Grace when it comes to his influence on church planning? What are you hoping for?
Yeah, what I'm hoping for, I think, plays to his strengths, and it's one of the reasons that we chose him and recommended him to the executive committee. I think it's why they approved him. One is we really hope, and I believe he will, focus on more of the why of church planting rather than the how of church planting.
Yeah.
Ian McConnell did a great job of putting the National Church Planning Group in place and putting a process in place that works within our polity now.
Yeah.
And so the National Church Planning Group, guys on that committee or that group, can do a lot of the how side of the equation. It's the why, it's the vision casting, it's the inspirational piece that I think will play to Eric's strengths. And to do that specifically by working with regions, regional leaders and regional assemblies, and inspiring them to make sacrifices to plant churches is one of the things we're hoping for as well. The other thing is, he just, you know this from being with him recently, Ben, he just has this grace on his life where he just attracts young leaders.
It's true.
And I think we're just noticing that and hoping that he's a guy that will be able to gather and attract young men who want to go and plant churches, whether they're new to pastoral ministry, or maybe it's a guy serving on one of our pastoral teams in one of our churches that gets around Eric and gets inspired to plant a church, and that team sends him to plant.
Yeah.
Those are just a couple of ways I think he's going to really serve us.
Yeah. Just spending a weekend with him last week, I felt a slight temptation to plant with him in California. Well, it's so enjoyable to be with him, feeling his influence, and feel inspired with him. So, well, I, for one, and I imagine many others of us in Sovereign Grace, are excited about what God has for us in the days ahead. Thanks for putting in the hard work of selecting or recruiting, anyway, the newest member of the leadership team, and praying that God will further our efforts to plant churches in the days ahead.
Amen.
Thanks for making time, Mark. Thank you, everyone, for listening, for watching the podcast, and we'll see you here again soon, right here on this podcast.
Thank you for watching. If you have questions or comments, Mark would love to hear from you. For more videos like this, hit subscribe on YouTube or by email at markkprater.com.